Deciding where you want to live in the world can feel really overwhelming. So don't feel badly if you don't even know where to begin. And this can be particularly difficult if you've already lived in another country and it didn't work out. Although I don't think any living experience can be considered a failure, and the worst case scenario, even if you hate somewhere where you go, at the end of your time there, you're going to walk away with a lot of valuable lessons and a much clearer picture of what you're looking for in the next place. In this video, I'm going to look at the criteria that Jeremy and I considered when we moved to Bulgaria, which is where we're currently living. Hi, my name is Maureen. In 2024, I moved to Bulgaria with my husband Jeremy and our two tuxedo cats, Damon and Pythias, and I make videos for expats and wannabe expats so that you can make an informed decision. How does one get started? The first thing I would suggest is that you sit down and brainstorm the things that you're looking for in your next living situation. It shouldn't just be to get out of the United States. That's a given. But write down everything, and that could be everything from something very concrete to we must be able to have a car to more of a feeling of what the city and the town might feel like where you choose to live. And then you'll at least have an idea of what it is that you're looking for. And if you're a couple, do this separately and then come back together and make a unified list based on what you both said individually. Let's take a look at the list that Jeremy and I put together.
This says what I want in the place we live at the top, but this is actually the combined document that I put together after Jeremy and I sat down and talked about our individual wish list. So our wish lists were pretty compatible. So here's what we're looking for: clean air, walkability, bikeability, access to hiking, and lots of green space. So that was kind of the feeling we were going for. And we wanted to be able to participate in our hobbies, which are largely done outdoors. So that was what we wanted the environment to look at. For the expat community that was there, it was particularly important if we decided to move to a non-English speaking country. We want it to be easy to make friends. We wanted to seek out compatible people. And I define that as having interesting life experiences. They're well traveled and they're not whack jobs. I want to be able to build a sense of community and not boring. That to me is the number one sin, is to be bored and to live in a place that doesn't stimulate me. So that was important. Then there were some practical things like good internet. We both work from home, so we need the good internet. Weather, we were looking at something relatively cooler and not over the low 70s. And this is one of those categories where your criteria may be very different. Some people love to go sit on the beach and just bake. That is not my idea of a good time. Put down whatever works for you. And then we looked at some practical things like minimal natural disasters. Is the country prone to hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, that kind of stuff? We wanted a relatively stable political environment. That was one of the problems we had when we went to Ecuador, was that it just wasn't stable politically. And of course, low crime, which also was not the case in Ecuador. Moving on, an affordable cost of living was important to us. And we define that as being able to cover all of our monthly living expenses, easily covered by Jeremy's Social Security check. So that's going to run us about $3,500 a month, because we don't want to use our business income or my Social Security for daily living. Our idea of an affordable cost of living was somewhere around that. We also wanted relative ease of getting back and forth to Colorado and to travel in general. We want a sense of calm and quiet, which I define based on our experience in Ecuador as minimal barking dogs and loud neighbors. As far as going out to eat, we don't eat out a lot, but when we do, we want decent and varied dining options. And as far as cooking at home, we want easy access to good food and cooking ingredients. And I define that as having a lot of options and being able to access organic products. We also wanted a place where our adult kids would like to come and visit and stay a long time. And then we added some more in 2023. And some of these hark back to what I already said, but I just wanted to emphasize them. We want a varied expat community, meaning we'd like different age ranges and levels of interest. We don't want to hang out with all retired people. That was one of our problems when we lived in Cotacachi, was that everybody was retired and we didn't have a lot in common with everybody. We want to be able to participate in volunteer opportunities that stimulate us. We want access to lots of events, and an outdoor living space was something we had not put on the list originally, but turns out is pretty important to us. So those were the things that we put on our list. Before we take a look at the spreadsheet that Jeremy and I used to evaluate Bulgaria, let's talk about a couple of things that you should bear in mind. When you're researching, just doing so at the national level, the level of a country, can be misleading. There's a lot of variables among cities and towns within a country, and while you certainly need to start at the national level, there are going to be things about the country that you need to ascertain right off the bat. Number one, does this country have a visa that we qualify for? That's a big one. If you can't get into the country, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to keep it on your list. What is the tax situation? Those kinds of things are things you want to look at the national level. But beyond that, if something looks good and passes that initial test at the national level, you're going to want to refine that down to a handful of cities within the country. There could potentially be huge differences in terms of things like cost of living, weather, all kinds of things. Walkability, bikeability will be different across the various regions of a country. So just start at the national level, and we'll talk about that when we look at the sheet, but plan to write it down. And if you're not sure what cities are in a country, just go to your search engine and type in, where do most expats live in, fill in the country, in Bulgaria, in Ecuador, in Mexico, fill that in. And that will give you a handful of cities to start with. And then the second thing I wanted to talk to you about is a lot of wannabe expats, and I did this too. I started my research with internationalliving.com. Go ahead and do that if you're at the very beginning phase and you're just looking for ideas, but don't put too much credence into anything you read on International Living. They make every place on the face of the earth sound like paradise, and that's just not the way it is. You're going to have challenges regardless of where you end up. And I don't want you setting yourself up for major disappointment if you buy into all their hype. So use it as a place to get started and to get ideas, but don't use it as your primary source of information. Okay, those are my caveats. Let's go look at our spreadsheet. Here's how we did it. I put all of the potential countries in the left-hand column. And I would encourage you to go into this with an open mind, unless you've already done some preliminary research and you've whittled it down to a handful of countries. Then obviously you wouldn't put a lot of countries here that you know that you're not interested in. When we left Ecuador, this spreadsheet is from when we left Ecuador, the sky was the limit as far as we were concerned. We took all our preconceived notions off the table. So I would recommend listing countries that you're even not sure about, or that your first reaction is, oh, I'd never go there. And another reason for doing that, because once your friends and family find out that this is what you're researching, or even just random acquaintances, they will start throwing out countries to you. And or you'll see something on International Living, or you'll see a YouTube video and you'll think, oh, what's wrong with Malta? Well, maybe you rejected Malta, but you don't remember why. This list is a living document. It's going to stay with you for a long time. You're not going to remember everything you rejected and the reasons why you rejected it, or the reasons why you like something. So I put countries on here that I knew we weren't considering. And then I do have a column further over on the right-hand side that is a reason why we rejected it. I have that document, so then somebody does come back to me and say, hey, did you look at South Africa? I can go back and be very confident in the reasons why we rejected a certain country and not have to feel like I have to go back and redo the research because we don't remember why. So put everything on there that's within the realm of possibility in that first column. I call that documenting the duds, making sure that everything is on there. How to get started on the spreadsheet. I would recommend putting the United States, if that's where you're from, or Canada, or the UK, wherever you're from, put that on the first line. Of course, it's not a country that you're going to move to at this point. This is the country you're moving out of. But you want to keep it there as a baseline as you go through the criteria. And also any other countries that you've lived in. So I started with the USA, and Ecuador and Mexico, because those were the three countries that we have already lived in. So there's your countries, and let's start talking about the criteria. Now, how we did it is in the very first column, we listed cities that we were interested in. So go ahead and fill in the cities that you're potentially considering within that country. Column 2. And oh, by the way, as how you list the countries, I did these initially very loosely in the order that we were considering them. So Slovenia was near and dear to my heart. It still is. And then we looked at France, Italy, and as we went down the list. So that's how we did it. You can do it by continent. You can do it alphabetically. Do whatever works for you. Then put your cities in column B. Column C, I would recommend that you look up the Global Peace Index. The Global Peace Index is an annual report that is put out. I'm not sure who puts it out. It's some sort of a nonprofit. And they evaluate most of the countries in the world. And they assign it a number. And the lower the number, the more peaceful it is. It talks about peace in the country from military interventions all the way down to the crime rate. So I will put the link for that in the description, but you'd want to go and look at the Global Peace Index because that tells you a lot about what the country is about. The United States had a Global Peace Index, and I believe these are from 2023, although 2024 is out and 2025 is probably coming out soon. The Global Peace Index for the United States was 132, which is not great. And one of our criteria was that we were not going to go to a country that had a higher score or less desirable score than the United States, which quite frankly was a very low benchmark. The only country on this entire list that had a higher Global Peace Index is Mexico, and we were not really considering Mexico as a viable option. We had already lived there 15 years before we undertook this exercise. So look up the Global Peace Index and go down and put those in there. And as you can see, the countries we were interested in, Slovenia is 9, which is almost as good as you can get. There's only 8 more peaceful countries above Slovenia. France, Italy, these were all countries that had acceptable indices. What, the numbers were low. Malaysia, low. Cyprus was a little bit higher. Montenegro. These are in yellow, by the way, because these were countries we strongly considered as I whittled things down. So Albania, Montenegro, and Bulgaria. And Bulgaria's Global Peace Index is 26, which is also quite good. The next thing we put into our criteria, column D, is the Quality of Life Index. That's a numerical assignment that I got from this website, which I will also leave in the description. It just gives a ranking, and you can go to that website and see what it is that they actually look at to rank the countries. And in this situation, the higher the number, the higher the quality of life. So the United States has 163. We didn't have a strict number that we were looking to aim for this, but it was something that we wanted to take into consideration. So you can see Slovenia again has a higher quality of life index, Ecuador much lower. Now bear in mind, this is one of those times where looking at the entire country can be very misleading. You could be living in an affluent gated community in a city that is home to a lot of wealthy natives, expats, and that quality of life would be quite high. So take this with a grain of salt, but I think that it would be helpful for you to list that. Column E addressed the cost of living, and you can do this in any way that works for you. So I went to a site called Numbeo, and I will put the link in the description. This site will give you all kinds of information. You can compare one city to another for their crime, for their cost of living, It's all kinds of information. So Numbeo will probably become your best friend. The statistic that I wanted to use, which is somewhat arbitrary, is what a family of 4 needs to live on. Not that we are a family of 4, but the only other listing they gave us was an individual, what an individual could live on, and that just didn't. I wanted to aim high. And for me, it was just a benchmark. So I can see that if a family of 4 needs $4,200 a month without rent in the USA, I can see that Ecuador requires about half of that. So it was just a benchmark, and I'm not here to argue the veracity of these numbers, but it gave me a place to start. But there are other benchmarks you can use, but you want to get a real tight sense of what that cost of living is going to be. And what I had mentioned earlier, which still holds true, is the definition of an affordable cost of living for us is being able to live only on Jeremy's Social Security. So we don't have to touch our business income or my Social Security or our investments. We just want to be able to live on his Social Security income. And based on that, these first 5 that we looked at, and I think everything on this list would not have been an issue. I did look it up on Numbeo, and you can filter it down by city. Here, let's go take a look so you can get a sense of what I'm looking at. Let's get a, just so you see what I'm talking about. So let's select a city. So we're going to go to, let's look at the city that we're living in right now. And there's a little bit of hoop jumping that you have to jump through. You have to, if you want to compare it to another, let's compare it to Boston. Okay, they usually ask you to log in at this point, which I just did. And then you get, in this particular case, a cost of living comparison between Boston, Massachusetts, and Plovdiv, Bulgaria. You can also go up here and do their quality of life. You can get their crime index, all of those things. So you can go apples to apples. They don't have smaller towns on Numbeo, but they do have quite a few cities on here that you can evaluate. The next thing we wanted to look at was the crime. And again, on a national level, this can be very misleading. We got our crime rankings from Numbeo. In this case, the lower the number, the better. So the USA started with crime of 47. Ecuador is 63. As you can see, it's quite a bit higher than the United States. And then other countries are considerably lower. Again, Slovenia. Slovenia came in as the winner. If you're wondering why the heck are they living in Bulgaria, Slovenia was the clear winner for us, with the exception of one very important thing, and that is we don't qualify for a visa there. They don't have a retirement visa. The only way we can live in Slovenia long term would be to buy property, and we are not ready to make that commitment. Now that we are in Europe, once we get our permanent residency in Bulgaria, we will use Bulgaria as a base and go visit Slovenia. I would not rule Slovenia out in the long run. It's just that we're not quite ready to commit at that level. So that's why Slovenia is number 1 on the list, but not where we're living. Let's keep going. G was bike friendly. That was a little hard to evaluate. I couldn't find any kind of statistics on that, so I just Googled how bike friendly is Plovdiv, Bulgaria? How bike friendly is Boston, Massachusetts? How bike friendly is San Miguel de Allende, Mexico? And got enough of a sense. So that was more of kind of a yes no thing. And I knew Ecuador was a no because we had lived there, and while we were living in the city, it was not bike friendly at all. The next column we looked at was the stability of their government and the economy. That came from a website called theglobaleconomy.com, and they rank countries in terms of their stability. So I used that in order to get a sense of that. The next column was bureaucracy, and I found it amusing because every country swears up and down that their bureaucracy is the worst. And I just think that bureaucracy, and by bureaucracy, I mean mostly how difficult is it to get a visa? How many hoops do we have to jump through? How many times do we have to go back to immigration? That's not a huge deal for us because we always hire an immigration attorney. And if you have someone who's doing that for you, then the level of bureaucracy isn't quite as bad. And also, we've been down this road several times, so we don't get stressed out when you go in with all your documents and you follow the checklist to the letter and they send you back home because you forgot to translate one document. We pretty much assume it's going to be that way. And then if it's not, then it's a plus. So you'll see they didn't really list these by any certain order of priority, but some of these were more important to us than others. So as we're getting over to the right, I'll explain that some of these didn't carry as much weight as some of the other ones. And bureaucracy was one of them. Corruption scale also came from Numbeo, and I made a note here, the lower the number, the better. Ecuador corruption within the government, very high at 66. I mean, it's more than double that of the United States. And then these other countries we were looking at were actually quite low. So the corruption wasn't something that we at least wanted to keep an eye on. Column K was visa options, which in terms of priority probably should have been over here at A or B, because as I mentioned, if you can't get a visa for the country, then there's not any sense in keeping it on your list. So this is where I listed the visa options. We knew that our best options would be either a retirement visa or, second to that, a digital nomad visa. Those are the two things that were going to work for us. So we looked for those kinds of things. And they're called different things in different countries, but they all allude to, do you have enough income and can you substantiate that guaranteed income to support yourselves so that you are not going to be a drain on their system? And then subsequent to that was a very important column is, can I work if I get a retirement visa? Because there are a number of countries, and it's one of the reasons that France came off the list and Italy. If you look down here, across from France, I wrote no, and Italy, no, because they have I don't know what they call their visas, but you cannot work if you get their I support myself independently type of a visa. They don't let you work, and that wasn't going to work for us because I still run my business. As we got into looking at European countries, I wanted to document whether or not the country was a Schengen country. That makes a difference in where we can travel around Europe. So I'm not going to go into that. If you don't know what a Schengen zone is, you can Google it and it will explain to you what that means. The next column was English speakers. I don't recall what resource I used for this, but I'll do some research and put that in the description box for you. It was important to us to have a fair number of English speakers. Having been in Ecuador, and we did learn Spanish, and we certainly learned enough to get by, but other languages are much more difficult to learn than Spanish, namely Bulgarian. So we wanted to make sure that there was some sort of a core group of English speakers so that we could get things done. So those were things that were important to us. So I checked out that scale and listed those here. Ease of getting a driver's license, that's important to us. I found that very difficult to research. So as you can see, I don't think I have any place where Montenegro I listed. That was important to us, but clearly it was not a deal breaker one way or the other because I didn't do anything on that one. But if it's important to you, put it there. Healthcare is another one that probably should have gone closer to the beginning. Kind of listed these as I thought of them, not in their order of priority. It's important to assess the quality of healthcare within a country. Some of this stuff you do have to take with a grain of salt as well. Many countries, in fact, most countries, as we've been looking, have a two-tiered system. They have a public system and a private system. If you can afford the private system, it's going to give you access to better healthcare. That's important to factor in when you're looking at things. And healthcare, of course, is most important if you have a condition that needs to be monitored. Jeremy and I do not, so we just need access to basic general healthcare. But if you have something that is something you need to take medication for, or need regular doctors for, or need a specialist for, you're going to want to make sure that you research that before you hop on the plane. Ease of making friends, that's very important to us. It's also very hard to evaluate. And basically, I just Googled it. I joined some Facebook groups. I wasn't really successful in finding a lot of information out about that. If you have other ways of evaluating what the expat community would be like in a country, please put it in the comments because it will help all of us out. The noise factor, difficult to evaluate. However, we did know, this is on a personal note, we did know that we did not want to live in any more Latin American countries. And it's primarily because of their noise levels. That also ruled out Spain, by the way. They just have a real noisy culture and it's fine for them, but it doesn't work for us. So you will see down here, I didn't go all the way to the bottom of this list. If we scroll down, you will see that all of these countries at the bottom are in red. And those are countries that we eliminated. And you'll see that there's no Central American or South American countries here. They were on the list, but we decided very early in the process that that was not what we were looking for. So we took them all off. I couldn't see keeping them on there because that's not something I'm going to forget when somebody says, whoa, why didn't you try Paraguay? Because it's a Latin American country. Okay, what's our next column? Noise factor. Yes, so and there's always going to be noise. That's just something I've come to accept. So you try to find the place with the least amount of noise that you can handle. The next column that was important to us was access and cost to get to the United States. Our kids are still there. I go back frequently. And if it's something where I have to make a lot of connections or it's a really pricey airfare, that's going to cut into my ability to get back and forth. Walkability, I believe there's a website that actually rates different cities according to walkability as high, low, and medium. I will put that in the description as well. Pollution was something that we were concerned about. We wanted a relatively safe level of clean air in our day-to-day environment. The weather, mostly I waited until we had refined the countries down rather than going to look. I mean, I know basically what the weather is like in France and Italy and throughout all the European countries, so it didn't have to be something I went and researched in a great amount of detail. Our other criteria was Social Security. Is it taxed? We both draw our Social Security and we wanted to know if that was going to be taxed because that impacts our bottom line. Likewise, does the country tax worldwide income? Also good to know. And do they have a tax treaty with the United States? These are things you can research on your own. And then once you whittle down your list, go see an accountant who has experience in different countries and find out what the bottom line is going to be for you and your taxes if you move to that particular country. The next thing was something we probably added, I'm sure, after we lived in Ecuador, is our street dogs a problem. That's a problem in a lot of countries. Most countries and cultures throughout the world do not baby and adore their pets the way that we do in the United States. And it's heartbreaking to watch. In addition to it being heartbreaking, it can also be dangerous if you encounter a street dog that's aggressive. That was something we wanted to evaluate. Quite frankly, Bulgaria has a huge problem with street dogs, so it was not a deal breaker for us, but it went into the mix in making our decision. The next column is water issues. Jeremy is very environmentally conscious, and his big thing was he didn't want to move to a country that was experiencing water shortages. We're not going to go to a country and then be a further drain on their system. So I did check to see what the viability of long-term water was going to be in the countries that we looked at. And then I had some random notes that I put in. And then my last column, my last column is the reasons we rejected it. And that one's critical because, as I said, you're going to forget or you're going to go live in a country and then decide it's not for you and you're going to go back to the drawing board. And who wants to start this thing all over again? Always put the reasons on your spreadsheet for why you rejected a country. So as we said, Slovenia is here. We don't qualify for a visa unless we buy property. And then I must have been in a whimsical mood because we rejected France because I said I don't want them seeing my underpants. That was a joke. The tax implications and the higher cost of living and the fact, it doesn't say it here, but I also know that for the visa we were looking at, we could not work. And I was not ready to give up my business. I would encourage you to put other columns on here. These are things that we look for, but the sky's the limit. Put things down that are important to you, and then you have a documented listing of what will and won't work for you. And what I did, I mean, this took me weeks to put together. This was not a weekend project. And then what we did is, as we refined things down, I highlighted the countries in yellow. And then as we eliminated countries, I took the yellow off. So if something was a definite no, they were in red. If they were in yellow, they made the cut. So our top three were Albania, Montenegro, and Bulgaria. They were all very close. Bulgaria has a much better global peace index than the other two countries, and Bulgaria is also part of the Schengen zone, and that was important to us. So that was why Bulgaria rose above the other two.
So there you have it. That is the system and the criteria that Jeremy and I use to evaluate Bulgaria. It doesn't matter what system you use, it's not an exact science. What matters is that you document your research somewhere, because you're not going to keep it all in your head unless you're only looking at 2 or 3 countries. So as you've already seen, Bulgaria didn't check all of our boxes. It did great on things like the Global Peace Index, the tax system, the affordable cost of living, English speakers. Those are things that all worked out great for us. But it didn't do well on the street dog problem, the bureaucracy, and the political stability. I mean, the government of Bulgaria changes every time you sneeze. It's just, they're working on it. So there are definitely some things that didn't make the cut. And there are some things that the jury's still out on. We don't know what the situation is going to be like for making friends here. We have been so busy getting our household set up, getting this channel started. We had company. Our daughter is coming at the end of this month. So we've been busy with those things and really haven't put a lot of time into meeting other expats. So we really don't know how that's going to work out. And we don't know what the healthcare system is like. We've done our research. We have private health insurance, but we're very fortunate in that we haven't had to use the healthcare system yet. So there are still things that need to be evaluated. In terms of next steps, that's up to you. Some folks would take this list and start whittling things down, decide which are your deal breakers and which ones you can live with. If you can afford to take an exploratory trip, I would encourage you to do that. That's only going to give you more information, but you don't have to. Jeremy and I took an exploratory trip to Ecuador for 6 weeks, and we moved 6 months later and we stayed for 18 months, and Ecuador was not a good fit for us. We came to Bulgaria without an exploratory trip, and so far we like Bulgaria very much. So whether or not you take that trip is really up to you. If you're in the middle of your country evaluation journey, please leave us a comment. Tell us what resources have worked for you, which ones haven't, and where you are in the process. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.